Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your passport to the stories that matter, globe showing Europe, Africa. I'm thrilled you're here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from around the world. Chapter 1, An Unsettling Invitation. The handsome cab clattered over the cobblestones of Bloomsbury, its wheels sending up small puffs of dust in the pale morning light. Through the misty veil that hung over London's rooftops, Hercule Poirot surveyed the familiar skyline with calm satisfaction. Each chimney stack and slate tile was as precise to him as the stitches in his own moustache. He wore a dark frock coat, polished to a mirror-like sheen, and his silk cravat was tied with the exacting symmetry that only he could achieve. Even the brass buttons on his waistcoat were aligned to within a millimetre of perfection. When the cab drew up outside Wessex House, a stately Georgian building with wrought iron railings and a discreet brass plaque reading, "The Royal Society for Psychical Research," Poirot paid the driver with deliberate slowness, ensuring each coin landed cleanly in the man's palm. He alighted with the grace of a dancer, paused to adjust his gloves, and raised a gloved finger to the heavy oak door. A single, soft knock was all it took. Madame Elise Montclair, the Society's elegant president, opened the door before the echo had even died. She was dressed in sombre black silk trimmed with jet beading, her hair swept into a tight chignon, and her dark eyes bright with worry. Though she strove for composure, the tremor in her voice betrayed her unease. "Monsieur Poirot," she began, her Gallic lilt overlaying her English speech, "I thank you for accepting my invitation on such short notice. Please, do come in." Poirot inclined his head in acknowledgement and stepped into a marble-floored vestibule. The air smelled faintly of lavender and polished wood. To his left stood an umbrella stand bearing a single, slender crook-handle umbrella, black with a silver ferrule. To his right, a console table held a silver tray with small silver bells, each labelled with the name of a society member. Poirot noticed a fresh lavender sprig beside his bell and filed away the detail, an act of hospitality, or a subtle attempt at soothing nerves. Madame Montclair led him through double mahogany doors into the main salon. Heavy velvet drapes in deep burgundy hung from gilded cornices, nearly brushing the plush, crimson carpet. At the far end, a wide bay window offered a view of a small, manicured garden, though its usual serenity was marred by a thin pall of mist curling around the hedgerows. On a low table beneath the window stood crystal decanters and cut glass tumblers, each filled with water or burgundy wine. Alongside, curious instruments dotted the polished surface, an ectoplasm detector, collection of glass vials labeled with arcane chemicals, and, most prominently, a mahogany planchette inscribed with gold filigree. Poirot paused, surveying the room with his trademark blend of keen interest and polite reserve. "Madam," he said softly, "your salon is most atmospheric. Perfect for a séance." She managed a brittle smile. "Yes, well, we strive for authenticity. But last night's events exceeded even our expectations of the uncanny." She motioned to a pair of velvet armchairs adjacent to the decanter table. "Please, sit." As Poirot settled into the chair, Madame Montclair poured him a small measure of tea. He accepted the cup, raised it to his lips, and inhaled deeply. "Marvelous," he murmured. "Tea of exceptional quality. Your attention to detail is impeccable." Her jaw tightened. If only all aspects of our work were as under control. She sank into the opposite chair. Monsieur Poirot, our medium, Miss Helen Carstairs, collapsed in terror during last night's séance. She insists she saw a malevolent spirit, intent on violence. I fear that more than the reputation of the society is at stake. Poirot's slender fingers tapped the porcelain saucer. Certainly, a séance is meant to entertain and perhaps enlighten, but not to induce terror. He set down the cup with absolute care. "Tell me about the proceedings. Who was present, and what transpired?" Madame Montclair took a trembling breath. We convened at 8 o'clock precisely. Present were Professor Reginald Keene, renowned psychologist, Lady Beatrice St. John, the former opera star, Captain Malcolm Reeves, decorated war veteran, Dr. Claudia Firth, our in-house parapsychologist, Mr. Edwin Mayhew, journalist and historian, Miss Carstairs, our medium, and myself. She counted on her slender fingers. The séance began routinely, prayers, candle lighting, the medium's invocation. Then, very quickly, Miss Carstairs's voice trembled. Poirot's moustache quivered in concentration. A tremble in the voice can betray the secrets of the heart, he mused. But proceed. She called out, softly at first, asking if any spirits wished to communicate. Then, quite suddenly, she cried, he is here, and fell back from the table, her eyes wide, staring at some unseen horror. Madame Montclair shivered. When we attempted to revive her, she insisted she had seen a figure in the corner, the shade of a man with flaming eyes. After that, she was incoherent, refusing to speak of what she saw. Poirot nodded. Humans are suggestible, madam, but suggestion alone does not cause such genuine terror. There must be another explanation, a trick, perhaps, or a deliberate attempt to frighten the medium. He lifted his gaze to meet hers. You asked me here not for spiritual counsel, but for investigation, yes. Madame Montclair's shoulders straightened. Exactly. The society's reputation, and the safety of our members, hangs in the balance. I need to know if one of us is responsible, or if these events stem from beyond the veil. Poirot allowed a faint smile. Then we shall apply reason, mesdames et messieurs, not spirits. My little grey cells will demonstrate their worth. He rose, placing both gloved hands upon the armrests of his chair as he studied the room. First, I shall require details of the séance room's layout. Then, each member's account of where they stood, what they handled, and what they witnessed. No fact is too trivial. Madame Montclair inclined her head. Of course. I have already prepared diagrams and notes. Shall I fetch them? Illinois Vals Plat. Poirot moved toward the window, peering out at the garden. The mist curled and retreated, as though shying from his scrutiny. He noted footprints in the dew, only a single set, leading from the window to the doorstep. An open window could explain a draught that flickered the candle flames, and a draught can cause movement, movement can spark fear. He filed these observations silently, open window, footprints, candlelight, velvet drapes. Moments later, Madame Montclair returned with a portfolio of papers and a small wax-sealed envelope. She opened the envelope to reveal a hand-drawn floor plan of the room where the séance took place, complete with annotations in neat, spidery handwriting. Poirot examined it, tracing the paths of each participant with his fingertip. In the séance last night, she explained, we sat in a circle around the table. Miss Carstairs sat here, she pointed to a small chair facing the bay window, and when she collapsed, she fell that way. Her finger pointed toward the drapes. No one moved. We were all rooted in place by the ceremony. Poirot pursed his lips. No one intervened. Only after she fell. We all rushed forward then. He nodded and looked up. Very good. Now, madam, let us assemble all present for a preliminary discussion. I shall wish to hear from each member directly. If you would be so kind as to ring for tea. She nodded, and on a silent bell the butler appeared. Soon, tea began circulating once more, though Poirot himself did not partake further. Instead, he strode to the center of the room, bringing every observer's attention upon him. Ladies and gentlemen, he said in his soft, cultured voice, we stand at the threshold of an extraordinary puzzle. We shall proceed with calm, we shall proceed with logic, and at the end of our inquiries, the truth will reveal itself, whether the culprit is mortal or otherwise. A hush fell. The faint tick of a grandfather clock in the corner sounded like a challenge, marking the beginning of Poirot's investigation. Outside, the London fog pressed against the window panes as though eager to hear the resolution of this delicate mystery. And so, with poised dignity and unwavering focus, Hercule Poirot embarked upon his latest case, one where the shadows of fear threatened to obscure the light of reason, and where every subtle clue might hold the key to averting tragedy. Chapter 2. Gathering the Suspects. Late that same morning, the drawing-room of Wessex House assumed an air of tense anticipation. The plush sofas and high-backed chairs sat in an ordered semicircle around a low mahogany table, now festooned with porcelain teacups and fresh biscuits. The morning sun, filtered through burgundy drapes, cast a warm glow that seemed at odds with the unease lingering in the room. One by one, the 6 members of the Royal Society for Psychical Research arrived, each bearing expressions ranging from polite curiosity to restrained anxiety. Professor Reginald Keene was the first to enter. Tall and angular, with prematurely greying temples, he carried himself with scholarly reserve. His horn-rimmed spectacles were perched upon the bridge of his nose, and he wore a dark tweed suit that spoke of academic seriousness. He greeted Madame Montclair with a curt nod, then paused to catch sight of Poirot. A flicker of surprise, mingled, perhaps, with relief, passed through his eyes. Next came Lady Beatrice St. John, once celebrated on the opera stage for her crystalline soprano. She was draped in a cream silk dress, over which a sable-trimmed coat hung elegantly. Despite her graceful posture, her fingers trembled as she smoothed the folds of her skirt. A strand of pearls coiled about her wrist, and she crossed her arms over her chest, a gesture half defensive, half regal. Captain Malcolm Reeves arrived shortly after, his military bearing unmistakable even in civilian attire. His tailored morning coat bore faint creases from travel, and his polished leather boots clicked purposefully on the parquet floor. Deep-set eyes surveyed the room with the caution of a seasoned officer. The square of his jaw was set firmly, as though determined not to betray any hint of fear. Dr. Claudia Firth, the Society's expert in parapsychology, made her entrance with a confident stride. Mid-30s, with auburn hair pinned back neatly, she wore a simple grey skirt and a crisp white blouse, sleeves rolled to the elbow. On her belt hung a small magnifying glass in a leather case, an affectation, one might think, but Poirot noted it without comment. Mr. Edwin Mayhew, journalist and society chronicler, bustled in on tiptoe, his notebook clutched to his chest. His bow tie was slightly askew, as though he had tied it hastily while rushing out the door. Behind him, the door opened once more, and Miss Helen Carstairs, still pale from the previous night's ordeal, was supported by Madame Montclair. The medium's forehead was damp with perspiration, and her dark eyes, ringed with sleeplessness, darted nervously at every shadow. Madame Montclair's voice cut through the low murmurs of greeting. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for arriving without delay. Monsieur Hercule Poirot has graciously agreed to assist us, and I ask your full cooperation." Poirot inclined his head to the assembled group. "Mesdames et messieurs, we shall proceed by obtaining from each of you a precise account of what you observed during last night's séance. Let us begin with the arrangements. Madame Montclair has provided a plan of the séance room. You will please place a marker where you sat, and describe in detail your position and actions." At Poirot's request, a second floor plan was distributed. With careful deliberation, each member marked their place. Professor Keene chose the chair by the east wall, nearest the bookcases. Lady Beatrice selected the position beside the hearth. Captain Reeves took the spot south of the medium. Dr. Firth sat opposite him, directly across the table. Mr. Mayhew tucked himself between the professor and the hearth, and Miss Carstairs, her hands still trembling, indicated her seat facing the bay window. Poirot folded his hands and began. "Professor Keen, you were nearest the bookcases. Were you engaged in any activity other than observing the medium?" Professor Keen cleared his throat. "I was, studying her expressions, Monsieur Poirot. I wish to note any involuntary changes that might betray fakery. I made no attempt to influence the séance." He paused, glanced at his neighbors, and continued more softly, "I did permit my mind to wander to my own experiments. But my attention returned instantly upon a sudden chill, though the room was warm." Poirot nodded, his brows knitting. "A chill, you say? And at what moment?" "At the instant Miss Carstairs uttered her first frightened cry." Poirot jotted a note. "Thank you. Lady Beatrice, you observed from by the hearth. You were the only one who rose from your place to adjust a candle just before the séance began. Why was that?" Lady Beatrice's fingers tightened around her teacup's handle. The flame flickered ominously. "I feared it would gutter." She paused, her slender neck bent as though recalling details. "It was mere courtesy. None of us desired poor Helen to perform by candlelight that threatened to die." Poirot watched her closely. "And did you notice any movement in the drapes? Or any draught?" She hesitated. "Now that you mention it, I thought I felt a slight breeze along my arm. But the window was closed, surely so." The captain, perched farther along the circle, interjected. "I checked the windows myself. The sash was fastened tight. No breeze could have entered." Poirot gave him a perfunctory glance. "Indeed? Captain, you are accustomed to vigilance. Did you notice anything unusual in Miss Carstairs' behavior prior to her collapse?" The captain ran a hand through his dark hair. "She was calm at first. But after the opening invocation, her knuckles whitened on the tabletop. I thought she was simply concentrating. And then she cried out, stepping back." He trailed off. Dr. Firth tapped the table. "It was more than concentration." Her voice cracked, but the tremor did not match the normal signs of stress. It was visceral. She leaned forward, eyes bright. "I have recorded many such reactions in my research, fear that precedes genuine threat. Yet nothing in our ritual could have caused that." Poirot made a small note by each statement. "Mr. Mayhew, as recorder, you sat between Professor Keen and Lady Beatrice. You were closest to the wine decanters." Mr. Mayhew's cheeks reddened. "I did pour water for myself and Miss Carstairs at the interval. She barely drank it, her hand shook too much. I did not touch her glass, nor Professor Keen's." "Very well. And you, Miss Carstairs," Poirot turned to the medium, "you were the focus. Though you fainted, you claim to have seen an apparition. Describe its appearance as precisely as you can." She swallowed audibly, gathering courage. It was a man, I think. Tall, with sunken cheeks and eyes that burned like live coals. He did not speak, but I felt his intention, rage, hatred. He hovered in the corner by the drapes, silent. Her voice quivered. "I have acted many séances, but never has any spirit moved with such malevolence." Poirot's moustache twitched in thought. "And this man, did you recognize any feature? A coat, a silhouette, anything?" She shook her head. "His outline was hazy, but I thought I saw a dark coat and a peaked hat, like one might wear on the moors." At this, Captain Reeves exchanged a glance with Dr. Firth. Professor Keen's lips compressed. Lady Beatrice drew her pearls into her palm. Even Mr. Mayhew bit his lip. Poirot held up a gloved hand to still the ripple of speculation. "Thank you, Miss Carstairs. Now, before we proceed, I shall examine certain objects from the séance. I ask that no one touches them until I have done so. The planchette, the decanters, and the drapes themselves may conceal vital details." He rose and paced to the table, his gait measured. Each step seemed weighed, deliberate. The others watched in silence as Poirot removed gloves, inspected the planchette's underside, sniffed at the wine decanter's rim, and ran the tip of his forefinger along the folds of the burgundy drapery. Returning to his seat, he cleared his throat. "Miss Amis, every one of us here is both witness and potential suspect. No action, no gesture, is beyond scrutiny. We shall reconvene this afternoon. In the meantime, I shall examine this room more thoroughly. I advise you to reflect calmly on your own observations, and to avoid conferring among yourselves. When we meet again, I will require candor and precision, for in the details lie the clues that will unravel this mystery." A hush settled once more. Madame Montclair, cheeks pale but composed, inclined her head toward Poirot. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. We shall await your findings." As each member departed, some lingering to catch glimpses of his retreating back, Poirot remained seated for a moment, eyes closed. His lips moved ever so slightly, as though guiding his little grey cells through the labyrinth of information already gathered. Outside, the London fog pressed closer against the windows, as if eager to conceal secrets. Inside, Poirot's mind was already racing ahead, charting paths through motive and opportunity, preparing for the next pivot in this delicate investigation. Thus concluded the first stage of questioning. The suspects had been assembled, each motive and movement documented. Now, with detailed testimonies in hand, Poirot would turn to the physical realm, examining traces, residues, and slight inconsistencies that only his unparalleled psychological acumen could reveal. The game, as he would say, was afoot. Chapter 3, Whispers in the Dark. Night had fallen over Wessex House, wrapping the stately Georgian façade in a cloak of mist and shadow. Within the main salon, the flames of 6 tall black candles guttered in their silver sconces, casting flickering patterns across crimson walls and mahogany furniture. The air was thick with the scent of burning wax and polished wood. Poirot stood by the bay window, adjusting the angle of his lapel, as Madame Montclair moved among the assembled guests, ensuring each had settled in their appointed seat. Once more, the circle was complete. Professor Keene sat by the east bookcases, Lady Beatrice hovered near the hearth, Captain Reeves took his vigil by the south wall, Dr. Firth faced him across the table, Mr. Mayhew nestled between the professor and the hearth, and Miss Carstairs, pallid from her earlier collapse, perched before the window. Poirot himself occupied the chair immediately to the medium's left, a position he chose with intention, wishing to observe her reactions at close quarters. Madame Montclair lifted her hand and spoke in a low tone. "We begin again at precisely 8 o'clock. I must remind everyone, no one is to speak unless addressed by Monsieur Poirot. Our aim is calm observation, nothing more." Poirot inclined his head and raised a slender finger. "Bien. The method of our inquiry shall be subtle. I shall ask questions and note responses. Let us proceed." The room held its breath. Outside, the London fog pressed against the tall windows, as though yearning to observe the proceedings. Inside, the silence was only broken by the soft tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. Poirot's keen eyes scanned each face, noting every blink, every subtle shift in posture. His moustache twitched in anticipation. Dr. Firth began the invocation in a clear, measured voice, intoning the traditional words used the previous night. Madame Montclair provided piano accompaniment, playing slow chords that echoed mournfully in the hush. The candles danced. The planchette rested at the center of the table, its gold filigree gleaming faintly. For 10 minutes, nothing happened but the measured hum of the invocation. Then, as Dr. Firth uttered the final phrase, "We welcome those who cross the veil," the candles flickered violently. A sudden chill slipped through the room. Poirot's eyebrows rose imperceptibly, but he made no move to reassure anyone, content to let tension mount. Miss Carstairs' head snapped up. In a whisper nearly lost beneath the candle's hiss, she murmured, "He comes." At that moment, Lady Beatrice gasped, and Captain Reeves rose as though to steady her, only to pause at Poirot's barely perceptible shake of the head. Everyone recoiled from the center, yet none dared to sit entirely still. The smell of lavender from Madame Montclair's sachets mingled with a faint tang of something coppery, like fresh blood. Poirot noted the detail without comment. A sudden crash of wind rattled the sash of the bay window, the drapes billowed inward. A candle went out with a soft wheeze. In the darkness, a low, anguished moan echoed, seeming to emanate from the very walls. The assembled members clutched each other's hands in fear. Poirot alone sat composed, his gaze fixed on the dark corner by the drapes where Miss Carstairs claimed to have seen the apparition. Then came the scream, piercing, desperate, final. Lady Beatrice leapt from her chair, sending her pearls scattering across the carpet. "Help her," she cried. Poirot shot to his feet, vaulting over the table with the grace of an athlete. The candlelight was restored in an instant as Dr. Firth, reacting faster than any of them, struck a match. Shadows danced wildly, revealing Miss Carstairs collapsed on the floor, her eyes squeezed shut, her hands over her ears. She shook convulsively, murmuring, "Too loud, too loud." The men surged forward, but Poirot raised a hand. "Back, stand back," he commanded softly yet firmly. He knelt beside the medium and placed a gloved hand on her wrist. He had a small vial of smelling salts in his pocket, a precaution he always carried. With a gentle shake, he applied a drop under her nostrils. Her eyes fluttered open, glazed and terrified. Poirot spoke quietly, "Miss Carstairs, it is I, Hercule Poirot. You are safe. Tell me, what did you hear?" She stared at him, trembling. A voice, a whisper. It said, "7 for the guilty. 7 for the blood." Then the crash, and then silence. Her lips quivered. I thought it would kill me." Poirot straightened, his expression grave. "Note well the words, Miss Amis. They are a clue, not a curse." He directed his gaze to Dr. Firth. "You heard the hiss of wind, how violent was it?" Dr. Firth brushed a strand of auburn hair back. "It came from the window, but only after the drapes moved. It felt artificial, as though someone outside manipulated it." Poirot nodded, filing away each detail. "And you, Captain Reeves, did you check the windows as I instructed?" The captain's jaw clenched. "Yes." The sash was locked. The catch was engaged. Poirot turned to Lady Beatrice. "Your scream, madam, was it provoked by the medium's fall or by something you observed?" Lady Beatrice swallowed hard. "By the candle extinguishing, monsieur, and by hearing the voice. It was unmistakable." Before Poirot could proceed, the distant chime of a phone rang through the corridors. Madame Montclair's butler appeared in the doorway, breathless. "Madam, you must come to the library at once. Professor Keene has collapsed." A hush fell. Miss Carstairs' cry of, "Not again," echoed. Poirot rose, straightening his coat. "Stay here," he ordered, turning to Dr. Firth. "Ring the police and have them meet us in the library. Do not touch anything further." He strode from the salon, each step purposeful, followed by Captain Reeves and Lady Beatrice. The air in the corridor felt oppressively close, candle sconces flickered as if struggling against an unseen gale. Poirot's moustache twitched. He sensed that danger lurked not in spirits but in flesh and blood. At the library door, Madame Montclair waited, lips ashen. She stepped aside. Within, rows of ancient volumes loomed in semi-darkness. In the center of the room lay Professor Keen, face pale, eyes closed, and one hand clutching something. Poirot knelt beside him, noting the position of the body. The professor had collapsed backward, as though struck by sudden weakness. He gently pried the professor's fingers apart. In his palm lay a single playing card, the 7 of hearts. Its surface was immaculate except for a tiny smudge of greasy residue on one corner. Poirot's eyes narrowed. He extracted the card with care, using a fresh pair of gloves. "Remarkable," he murmured. "The medium spoke of 7 for the guilty, and here we find 7 of hearts." He turned to inspect the residue. "This grease, it is not from the table, nor from the professor's person. Someone handled this deliberately moments before." Madame Montclair drew in a shuddering breath. "But who would do such a thing?" Poirot pocketed the card in a small evidence envelope. "That, madam, is what we must determine. Note, no other playing cards are scattered about. This was placed here intentionally." He rose, smoothing his coat. "Captain, secure the door. Lady Beatrice, remain in the salon with Miss Carstairs until I return. Madam, bring all members here once they have been informed." As he strode out of the library, Poirot felt the familiar thrill of the chase. The night's shadows held secrets, but he was resolved to illuminate them all. The 7 of hearts lay heavy in his pocket, a cipher waiting to be decoded. Outside, the fog thickened, as though to conceal the path ahead. But Poirot's little grey cells were already racing, arranging the fragments of this dark puzzle into a pattern only he could discern. And so, beneath the hush of London's foggy night and the flicker of unsteady candlelight, the investigation took its darkest turn yet. The séance had awakened more than fear, it had unleashed intent, and now the true game began. Chapter 4, The First Red Herring. Dawn's pale light filtered through the tall windows of Wessex House, chasing the London fog back into the streets. In the oval breakfast room, Poirot presided at the head of a polished mahogany table, his posture as exacting as the folded napkin by his plate. Around him sat the society members, each nursing a cup of strong tea and the lingering tension of last night's events. Madame Montclair poured coffee for herself with trembling hands. "I confess, I did not sleep a wink," she murmured. "I fear for Professor Keen's condition, and for our safety." Poirot inclined his head with polite sympathy. "Rest assured, madam, that the police have taken Professor Keen into their care. I have secured the playing card found in his hand, an object of considerable significance." He tapped the card-sealed envelope with his fingertip. Lady Beatrice St. John, seated to Poirot's right, swallowed a slice of toast and ventured, "Monsieur Poirot, must we linger on that cursed card? Is it not but a trifling token?" "On the contrary," Poirot replied, turning those keen grey eyes upon her. "A token, yes, but also a message." He stood and moved to a small easel upon which he had placed an enlarged photograph of the 7 of hearts. "Observe the card's back design." He tapped a gloved finger against the surface. "This motif belongs to the exclusive Windsor Club, an establishment for gentlemen who favor discreet gatherings and high-stakes gaming. Captain Reeves is a member." Poirot's gaze flicked to the captain, whose jaw tightened imperceptibly. Captain Malcolm Reeves met Poirot's look steadily. "I admit my membership, monsieur," but I fail to see how a harmless playing card implicates me in any wrongdoing." Mr. Edwin Mayhew, ever the journalist, leaned forward eagerly. "But you have easy access to such cards, Captain. And you sat closest to the spot where the professor collapsed." His eyes glittered with mischief as he savored the prospect of a scoop. Captain Reeves's face flushed. "And am I to be blamed simply for knowing the club's card design? I have no motive to harm Professor King." Poirot raised a hand for silence. "We shall consider motive in due course. For now, I must ask, did any of you touch the card before it was found?" "Madame Montclair?" Madame Montclair shook her head. "I was in attendance to the professor when he fainted. I did not handle his hand or the card." "Dr. Firth?" Dr. Claudia Firth lifted her chin. "I examined the professor's wrist for a pulse. A playing card was not my concern until Monsieur Poirot retrieved it." Poirot nodded, then turned to Miss Carstairs, who sat pale and wide-eyed. "Miss Carstairs, you were nearest the window. You did not see anyone approach the professor?" She shook her head. "No, monsieur. I was distraught by my own collapse. I saw only shadows." Poirot paced slowly before the group. "Thus, the card may have been placed after the professor fell, either by one of us or by an unseen hand." He paused, pressing his palms to his abdomen. "Yet the Windsor Club design suggests the one who planted it wished to point suspicion at Captain Reeves." Lady Beatrice frowned. "A diversion, then?" "Precisely, madam. A red herring." Poirot turned to Captain Reeves. "You understand, Captain, that suspicion may shift until we discover the card's true purpose." Reeves nodded curtly. "I understand. But I am no more guilty than the rest." Poirot allowed a faint smile. "That remains to be seen. Now, there is another aspect to this card." He held up a magnifying glass and inclined it over the photograph. "Observe the very faint embossing along this corner." He traced a barely visible line. "A name in microtext, E. Montclair." Madame Montclair gasped, pressing a hand to her throat. "My name? Impossible." Poirot folded his arms. "Yet there it is, madam, faint but legible under magnification. It appears someone has taken a genuine Windsor Club card and discreetly had it re-embossed. A clever touch, almost unnoticeable." Dr. Firth leaned across the table, adjusting her own magnifier. "Extraordinary, but whose plan? Madame could have had a motive if she sought to discredit Captain Reeves. Or could she have set herself up as a scapegoat?" Madame Montclair's visage crumpled. "I would never harm my own society." Mr. Mayhew, notebook poised, pressed on, "And yet the name on the card suggests your involvement." E. Montclair. Poirot raised a hand. "Let us not leap too quickly to conclusions. The forger of this card may have wished us to believe Madame Montclair did it. A second diversion. We must therefore consider both possibilities, that Captain Reeves is framed by the card's maker, or that Madame has been framed by the forger." He turned slowly, regarding each member. "We have two false leads, the Windsor Club designed to implicate the captain, and the microtext to implicate the hostess. Both subtle, both complex. The true culprit may rely on our pursuit of these red herrings to conceal the real intent." Lady Beatrice's eyes narrowed. "But what real intent? To trouble us further?" "Perhaps," Poirot replied, "but we must drill down. We know the card was placed in Professor Keen's hand after he collapsed. We know the playing card was bespoke, stolen from the Windsor Club, re-embossed, and then returned. This required both access to the Windsor Club and a skilled forger. Captain Reeves, regaining some composure, said, "I frequent the club, but only to play faro. I have no acquaintance with forgers." "And yet," Poirot said gently, "someone with your background, military service, might know individuals willing to procure or alter such items. But what would be your motive?" Reeves glanced at Madame Montclair, then at Lady Beatrice. "I am at a loss. My rivalry with Professor Keene over that commendation does not extend to murder." Poirot tapped a slender fingertip against his lips. "Good, Captain. We shall keep that in mind. Now, let us hear from Mr. Mayhew." He gestured to the journalist. "Your pursuit is the written word. Could you have fabricated the card story for sensational copy?" Mayhew blinked, then straightened. "I confess, the temptation is great. But I hold the Society's work in high regard. I would not exploit such a tragedy." "Admirable," Poirot said dryly. "Yet the pen is mightier than the sword, is it not? A fabricated card would make splendid copy." Mayhew flushed but said nothing further. Poirot then addressed Lady Beatrice. "Madam, you have lived a life of drama and performance. Could you have arranged this as the grandest spectacle yet?" She recoiled as if struck. "No. I may have been frightened, but I would never harm Professor Keene. My only wish is for peace." Dr. Firth leaned forward. "Perhaps the least likely suspect is the true culprit." Poirot held up a hand. "We must avoid the fallacy of that maxim. Instead, let us return to facts. I propose we inspect the card itself. Until now, I have worked only from a photograph." He carefully removed the seal from the envelope and withdrew the card. Holding it by the corners with gloved hands, he examined both faces. "I noted a grease smear on this corner," he said, turning the card so all could see. "Belladonna residue, or something similar. A toxin used to induce hallucinations." A collective gasp rose from the table. Madame Montclair paled. Lady Beatrice recoiled into her chair. Captain Reeves frowned deeply. Poirot continued. "The professor did not simply collapse from fear, he fell into convulsions. Now, poison can mimic fright-induced collapse. The card thus served a dual purpose: mark the victim and administer the toxin." He placed the card gently on the table. "Our culprit is one who possesses intimate knowledge of toxic substances, and access to bespoke playing cards." Dr. Firth's eyes widened. "Only one among us fits that description precisely, myself." She sat up straighter. "As parapsychologist, I keep bell jars of various compounds. But I swear, I have never used any to harm another." Poirot raised a gloved palm. "I do not make accusations lightly. But it is clear the card was part of a more elaborate scheme than a simple fright. We have uncovered 2 red herrings, and now a clue too bitter to dismiss." He looked around the breakfast room, meeting each gaze in turn. "I ask you all to reflect, who among us could procure belladonna, who could forge a card, and who had the motive to terrify, and perhaps kill, Professor Keene? Our next step is to examine alibis and laboratory records. Until then, I shall hold this card as evidence, while you consider what you know of one another." Silence fell over the table. The baker's bread grew stale in half-eaten slices, steam curled impotently from cold teacups, and all 6 faces bore suspicion and fear. Poirot folded his napkin with precise folds. "We shall reconvene at 2 o'clock. Until then, no one is to leave these rooms. We must trap the culprit before any further mischief unfolds." As he rose, Lady Beatrice's voice broke the quiet. "Monsieur Poirot, will you at least allow me to restore warmth to this room?" Poirot offered a small smile. Very well, madam. A brighter flame may bring clarity. She crossed to the hearth and set to work, stoking the coals. The room glowed with renewed warmth, yet beneath the dancing flames lay a chill of suspicion sharper than any London fog. And as the ticking clock signaled the passage of minutes, each member sat lost in thought, aware that the true danger might lie not in red herrings, but in the dark intentions of one among them. Chapter 5, Secrets Behind Closed Doors. The afternoon light slanted through the tall windows of Wessex House, painting the drawing room in muted gold. Poirot rose from his seat and surveyed the assembled members of the society. Mesdames et messieurs, he said calmly, we have uncovered misleading clues and half-truths. Now, it is time to examine what lies concealed beneath polite façades. I shall interview each of you in private, one at a time. Please remain here until your name is called. A hush fell over the room. Madame Montclair and the others exchanged uneasy glances. Poirot offered a reassuring nod before leading the way to a small adjoining study, its shelves lined with leather-bound volumes and brass instruments. He motioned to a velvet armchair. Professor King, Poirot began as the psychologist entered. Please sit. The professor eased himself into the chair, adjusting his spectacles. Poirot closed the door behind them and sat opposite. The study's hush was broken only by the ticking of a mantel clock. Professor, Poirot said softly, you have long studied the shadows of the human mind. What of your own motives? You desired more funding for your experiments, yes? Professor Keen's face hardened. My research into subconscious suggestion could revolutionize therapy. Madame Montclair withheld additional grants, insisting funds go to parapsychological ventures. I resented that, but I would never harm her, or myself. Poirot nodded, steepling his fingers. And yet you handled belladonna before this? In your studies of extreme psychological stress, you once recorded its effects. The professor's eyes widened. That was purely theoretical, and in minuscule doses, under controlled conditions. I would not employ it as a weapon. Poirot tapped a note. Very well. Tell me of your relationship with Lady Beatrice. A flicker of color rose in Keen's cheeks. A fleeting affair, as you know. It ended when she refused to leave the stage for academic life. It caused me humiliation, but not enough to kill. Thank you, Professor. You may go. Poirot rose and opened the door. The professor exited, brushing past Lady Beatrice, who waited apprehensively. Lady Beatrice, Poirot invited in his smooth tone. Once alone, he closed the door behind her. You are accustomed to performance and high emotion. Is life on the stage so different from this theatre of fear? Lady Beatrice clasped her hands. Monsieur, I confess I was jealous of Professor Keen's brilliance. I feared he might overshadow me even in society circles. Yet I loved him, despite everything. Poirot observed her, noting the subtle tremor in her voice. And yesterday morning, you rose early to fetch Madame's rare rose water for tea. You handled the decanter. She paled. I did. I wished her comfort. But I touched only the rose water, not the wine. Indeed. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Yet the decanter you held bore traces of belladonna on its lip. Were you aware? Lady Beatrice shook her head vehemently. No. I would never poison anyone. I was simply trying to be kind. Poirot inclined his head. Very well. Thank you. He opened the door. Lady Beatrice departed, and Captain Reeves entered, closing the door behind him with a precise click. Captain, Poirot began, you are a man of honor. You spoke of rivalry with Professor Keene over a war commendation. That rivalry, was it deeper than simple envy? Reeves ran a hand through his hair. In the trenches, we fought side by side. When the official medal came, it went to Reginald. I felt wronged, but I swallowed my pride. I have no desire to kill or maim outside the battlefield. Poirot nodded slowly. Yet you denied the sash of that bay window was disturbed. I have since discovered that the window's catch had been subtly loosened. Reeves frowned. Loosened? I locked it myself. A professional job, Poirot murmured. But why risk exposing the murderer's escape route? Does someone wish to frame you? Reeves's lip curled. I know nothing of it. But if my reputation is at stake, I will clear my name. Poirot tapped a note. One more question. Your pocket watch, believed lost last night, was found beneath the hearth. Why? Reeves's cheeks colored. I dropped it when we rushed forward after the scream. When I retrieved it, I did not mention it, not wishing distraction. Poirot inclined his head. Very well. He opened the door. Reeves strode out into the corridor, and Dr. Claudia Firth entered with a brisk nod. Dr. Firth, Poirot said, you analyze phenomena scientifically. Yet you have access to chemicals and recording devices. Could you have orchestrated the poison and the card? Dr. Firth met his gaze calmly. I specialize in detecting fraud, not fabricating it. My experiments are transparent, published, peer-reviewed. I would gain nothing from murder. Poirot leaned forward. You claimed the blast of wind during the séance was artificial. You are skilled in creating controlled air currents for experimental effect. Dr. Firth's mouth curled into a half-smile. Yes, I experimented with a silent fan mechanism for spirit photography. But that was dismantled last month. Perhaps you reassembled it. Poirot allowed a soft chuckle. Yet I sense no malice in your demeanor. He stood. Thank you, Dr. Firth. She rose and exited, leaving only Mr. Mayhew, who walked in with eager expectation. Mr. Mayhew, Poirot said, the pen is your instrument. You recorded our discussions, perhaps you rewrote them. Mayhew's eyes flickered. My job is to document accurately, monsieur. A sensational alteration might sell papers, but at the cost of integrity. Poirot's moustache twitched. Integrity, or fear of exposure. You uncovered that Madame Montclair had misallocated funds, did you not? Mayhew's face paled. I reported financial discrepancies in her last annual return. But I never published the details. I withheld them, out of friendship. Yet you held a grudge when she refused your request for exclusives. Poirot tapped his notebook. Your articles failed to appear. Mayhew swallowed. I admit disappointment. But not enough to kill. Poirot closed his notebook. Thank you, Mr. Mayhew. He opened the door, and Miss Carstairs drifted in, fragile as a ghost. Miss Carstairs, Poirot said gently, you suffered 2 collapses and witnessed apparitions. Your mind is a cradle of imagination, but also of fear. She trembled. I saw him both times. The man with burning eyes. The voice in the darkness. Poirot steepled his fingers. Could your recollections have been shaped by suggestion? By fear of failing the society? Tears welled in her eyes. I would not lie. I fainted out of terror. But I saw him. And the card? Poirot asked softly. Did you place it in the professor's hand to mark him as the 7th betrayal? She shook her head emphatically. No? I did nothing but sit and summon spirits. Poirot rose and opened the door. Each member awaited in the corridor. He stepped into their midst and surveyed them, each bearing traces of defensiveness, guilt, or relief. "Miss Amis," he said, "we have heard your secrets. Some truths, some half-truths, some red herrings. Tomorrow, we shall assemble once more for the next phase of our investigation, physical evidence from the scene itself. The drapes, the floorboards, the drench of belladonna. Until then, reflect on your place in this circle, for one among you holds a secret yet unrevealed, and the key to this mystery lies within that secret." With that, he departed, leaving the society in a hush of whispered conjecture. The closed doors held their confidences as tightly as the suspects held their fears. Outside, London's evening lights flickered through the gathering gloom, oblivious to the storm of suspicion swirling within Wessex House. Chapter 6, An Unexpected Turn. The Sunday morning sun streamed weakly through the tall windows of Wessex House, gilding the mahogany panelling with a soft, reluctant warmth. In the drawing room, the 6 society members assembled, some nursing bruised nerves, others steeling themselves for what lay ahead. At the head of the gathering, Hercule Poirot stood calm and composed, hands clasped lightly behind his back. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began in his gentle, precise tone, "yesterday we uncovered clever misdirections, the bespoke playing card and the false imprint of microtext. Today, I present to you a discovery so unexpected that it changes the entire character of our case." He paused to allow the weight of his words to settle. Lady Beatrice's pearls clinked nervously as she adjusted them about her wrist. Captain Reeves straightened in his chair. Dr. Firth sat forward, curiosity bright in her eyes. Mr. Mayhew clutched his notebook, ready to record. Miss Carstairs shivered, glancing at Madame Montclair, whose face was as pale as the silk of her morning dress. Poirot walked to the low table where a crystal decanter and 6 cut-glass tumblers were displayed. He removed his gloves and lifted the decanter. "This," he said, "once held nothing more suspicious than claret. But upon inspection by Dr. Firth's laboratory," here Dr. Firth inclined her head, "we discovered traces of belladonna in the wine." A collective gasp rose from the group. Madame Montclair's hand flew to her mouth. Lady Beatrice stared in horror. "Belladonna," she whispered. "But who would taint the wine?" Poirot set the decanter down carefully. "I mixed a sample of the contents with Professor Keen's wine glass, his own tumbler, found at the scene of his collapse. The chemical signature was identical. The card's residue and the wine's now confirmed poison leave no doubt. Our perpetrator sought not only to mark the professor with a token but to kill him outright." Captain Reeves leaned forward. "But I checked the decanter after the first séance. It was untouched." "And yet," Poirot said, "the poison must have been introduced between the second séance and the moment the professor drank. Note that only one person poured wine that evening, Madame Montclair herself, if I recall." Madame Montclair's cheeks flushed. "I served wine at dinner, but only then. Last night, we had only water." Poirot inclined his head. "Indeed. The water decanter remained pure. But our friend, the poisoner, needed to wait until the professor thought it safe to drink again. Observe the sequence. After the first collapse, the professor was carried to the library, then returned here for warmth. In that interval, the decanter stood upon the sideboard, out of sight. It was then that the toxin was applied." Dr. Firth raised a gloved finger. "But who had access to that sideboard at that time?" Silence followed as each member considered the question. Lady Beatrice's eyes flicked toward Madame Montclair. Captain Reeves surveyed the windows. Mr. Mayhew's pen hovered over his notebook. Miss Carstairs' lips trembled. Poirot allowed the moment to stretch before speaking. "Let us recount. Madame Montclair retrieved Professor Keene and brought him back here. Captain Reeves claims to have accompanied her. Lady Beatrice was summoned to arrange fresh coverings for him. Mr. Mayhew and Dr. Firth remained with Miss Carstairs in the salon. Each of these positions allows opportunity, but only one permits the necessary chemical knowledge and the calm nerve to apply poison without detection." He stepped closer to Madame Montclair. "You, madam, are no stranger to rare substances, rosewater, essential oils, and other tinctures. You may not have intended to harm Professor Keene, but you did possess the means." Madame Montclair's eyes filled with tears. "Monsieur Poirot, forgive me. I did not wish to kill him. I only hoped to frighten him, as I said before, to reverse his refusal to continue my funding." Gasps echoed. Lady Beatrice rose, clutching her pearls. "You poisoned him? You would have killed your own host." Madame Montclair shook her head. "Not kill, only delay, incapacitate. I thought he would recover quickly, shamed, and reinstated. But I misjudged the dosage." Poirot's moustache quivered. "And who prepared the dosage? Who measured the belladonna?" Madame Montclair glanced at Dr. Firth. The parapsychologist's calm demeanor faltered. Her eyes darted to Captain Reeves, then to the door. Poirot turned to Dr. Firth. "You have a laboratory on the premises, samples of belladonna for study. You know, better than anyone, precisely how much will cause convulsions." Dr. Firth's voice trembled. I provided the standard samples for the Society's research. But I did not measure or apply poison." Poirot raised a gloved palm. Madame Montclair admitted to fright alone. "Dr. Firth, you insist on scientific precision. Yet someone combined your knowledge and Madame's access. A collaboration, perhaps." He swept his gaze across the room. "Let us not ignore Captain Reeves, who discovered the window catch loosened, clearly manipulated to stage supernatural events. Or Mr. Mayhew, who stood by ready to record any sensational development." Mr. Mayhew protested, "I only took notes. I had no part in this." Poirot nodded. "Indeed. But passion can be concealed behind the recorder's pen. We must consider all possibilities." He returned to the decanter. "Finally, note this detail." He held up one of the tumblers. "Madame Montclair, your rosewater decanter, why did you set it here beside the wine?" Madame Montclair blinked. "For fragrance, so that the scent might soothe the guests." "Yet the decanter bears no residue of poison," Poirot observed. Clearly, the poisoner branched across both decanters, ensuring the right container held the fatal draught. The plan was elegant, too elegant for a crime merely of passion or financial need. A hush settled. Outside, the distant rumble of city traffic reminded them they were still in London, not in some secluded country house. Poirot's little grey cells raced. "There is one more piece," he said quietly, "that brings clarity to this unexpected turn." He reached into his waistcoat pocket and produced a sealed envelope. "This arrived only an hour ago, slipped under the front door." He placed it on the table and invited Madame Montclair to open it. Her hands shook as she lifted the seal. Inside was a single sheet of heavy stationery, upon which was scrawled, in hurried handwriting, "7 for the blood is not the end. Beware the hand that pours, for it may stain more than glass." Lady Beatrice gasped. "A threat?" Captain Reeves frowned. Someone knew of the card's message, and foresaw the poisoning. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Exactly. Our culprit anticipated that we would be distracted by the 7 for the guilty, and used the card symbolism to cloak a more lethal scheme. This note confirms collusion, a second-hand warning the poisoner to proceed. He folded his arms. Miss Amis, the case has shifted. We now hunt not one but 2 conspirators, the forger of the card and the applier of poison, and possibly a third who warned them. The web grows more intricate. He turned to Madame Montclair. Madam, you admitted your intention to frighten. But nothing in your letters or conduct suggests a second party aiding you. Who amongst us approached you with sinister counsel? She faltered, glancing at Dr. Firth. Dr. Firth mentioned methods of inducing fear scientifically, but only as academic discussion. Poirot's moustache twitched with triumph. Academic, or instructional? Dr. Firth, you spoke of silent fans. But you also know precisely how to measure toxins. And you have access to this society's laboratories. Dr. Firth's professional composure cracked. You cannot accuse me. Poirot held up a finger. I do not accuse. I merely observe. Let us recall, the note arrived with no postmark. Only someone within this house could have delivered it. And only one person had the motive to escalate fright into poisoning, the one who felt scorned when their theories were dismissed. He paused, letting the import of his words hang in the morning air. The members exchanged fearful glances, each acutely aware that the circle of suspicion had narrowed and darkened. Poirot stepped back. Tonight, we shall confront the lab itself. In the next chapter, we shall examine the arsenal of chemicals and the tools for forgery, and reveal who among us turned scientific curiosity into murder. With that, he swept from the room, leaving behind a tableau of shock and mounting dread. Outside, the mist had receded, but within Wessex House, the fog of deception grew ever denser, and only Poirot's little grey cells could hope to penetrate it before another tragedy struck. Chapter 7, The Pieces Align. Late that afternoon, Poirot summoned the 6 members back to the main salon. The room had been scrubbed of tea stains and biscuits, but tension lingered like a stubborn shadow. On a low table at the center lay the implements of their inquiry, the burgundy drapes, the mahogany planchette, the custom playing card, and several glass vials from Dr. Firth's laboratory. Poirot stood beside them, gloved hands clasped behind his back, his expression inscrutable. Miss Amis, he began, we have now seen the misdirections, the poisoning, and the anonymous warning. Today, we turn to the physical evidence. I shall display each piece and invite you to observe. By the end of our session, I trust the pattern will be clear. He first gestured to the drapes. These curtains were billowed by a gust during the séance. I asked the housekeeper to remove them for inspection. Poirot unpinned the heavy fabric and held it aloft. Note these tiny holes, 3, equally spaced. Someone inserted a slender rod to flap the drapes and create illusion. Captain Reeves frowned. I checked the window catch, but I did not notice any holes. Poirot dropped the drape. The holes are so small they eluded casual notice. Only an expert hand, one accustomed to delicate work, could have made them. Consider who here engages in fine manipulations. His gaze drifted to Madame Montclair's slender fingertips. She drew her hands into her lap. I only arranged these for aesthetic harmony. I had no cause to mutilate them. Perhaps not you, Poirot allowed, but someone with access to the draperies and the motive to frighten. He paused, letting the implication settle before moving on. Next, he held the mahogany planchette. This instrument was used only to distract. Study these faint grooves along the base. Using a jeweler's loupe, Poirot traced the marks. They correspond to the teeth of a safety catch, carefully filed down. Who among us would tamper with a planchette so precisely? Dr. Firth adjusted her magnifier. I study these instruments academically, but I would never damage one. Poirot nodded. Still, the grooves point to someone with experience in mechanical adjustment. The same hand that drilled the drapes might have tampered with this. He set the planchette aside and picked up the custom playing card sealed in its evidence envelope. We have established that the card was stolen from the Windsor Club, re-embossed, tainted with belladonna, and returned. Yet one detail remained elusive until now. Poirot laid the card on a clean sheet of white paper and tilted it beneath the lamplight. The corner bears not only a grease stain but also microscopic fibers, silk fibers dyed burgundy. Lady Beatrice gasped. My theatre cloak is burgundy silk. She fingered her coat, which hung on a nearby stand. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. A telling connection. The culprit handled the cloak while preparing the card, perhaps to steady the work or conceal the faint smell of chemicals. Lady Beatrice's face went pale. But I removed my cloak before each séance. It never left the hall. Poirot gave a slight smile. Exactly the sort of detail one might claim, had one forgotten the cloak's actual location. Yet burgundy silk fibers from that wardrobe are very specific. Lady Beatrice swallowed, but said nothing. Poirot moved on to the vials arranged before him. Dr. Firth transferred these from her lab. 3 contain standard parapsychological reagents, 1 contains belladonna extract of 0.3% concentration. He held up the vial. This matches the residue found on the card and in the wine. The label, however, was freshly replaced. The original label was dated June 12. Dr. Firth frowned. I replaced the faded label last week. It was my own lapse. Poirot's eyes twinkled. A convenient lapse. But I found traces of June lavender oil beneath the old label's adhesive, an oil I purchased for Madame Montclair's sachets. Madame Montclair let out a soft sigh. I supplied that oil for the salon's fragrance. Indeed, Poirot said. Thus we see an intersection of your sachet oil and the belladonna vial, a transfer I discovered when examining the adhesive under ultraviolet light. He paused, letting the significance register. Now, to the final piece. Poirot reached into his waistcoat and withdrew the anonymous note. He read it aloud. 7 for the blood is not the end. Beware the hand that pours, for it may stain more than glass. He folded the note with care. This was delivered from within these walls, unsigned. It warned the poisoner that the card's message alone would not suffice, and that the poison must be introduced through the pouring vessel. A cunning collaborator, indeed. He turned to the group. We have established 3 strands, the physical tampering, drills in the drapes and planchette grooves, pointing to a skilled hand, the silk fibers connecting to Lady Beatrice, and the shared use of supplies, lavender oil and belladonna vial, linking Madame Montclair to Dr. Firth's laboratory. Finally, the anonymous threat implies a third conspirator acting as lookout or co-conspirator. A tense silence ensued. Captain Reeves broke it at last. So, we have at least 2 perpetrators. But why? What grand design unites them? Poirot folded his arms. Motive, Ms. Amis, is as important as means. Let us consider, Lady Beatrice desired to regain Professor Keen's attention, yet she claims only emotional motive. Madame Montclair desired funding, financial motive. Dr. Firth sought scientific recognition, academic motive. And Captain Reeves, perhaps sought vindication of his honor. He paced slowly, hand to chin. Our culprits manipulated both fear and science to discredit the society's credibility. But why escalate to murder? Because they sought to remove Professor Keene as an obstacle, to halt his skeptical critiques and dominate the society's direction. He stopped and regarded them in turn. The evidence points most strongly to Madame Montclair and Lady Beatrice as primary conspirators, with Dr. Firth providing chemical expertise, and perhaps Mr. Mayhew acting as messenger. Mr. Mayhew stiffened. "I would never aid in a murder." Poirot's eyes softened. "I make no accusation without confirmation. That is why, tonight, I shall host a final séance, staged by me. I ask that each of you attend, no roles assigned. The spirits will speak, and the guilty hands will tremble under observation." He offered a thin smile. Once more we return to the familiar circle. Only this time, the planchette will be fitted with a new catch, the drapes inspected for rods, and the card replaced by a harmless token. Then, under the pretense of contacting the departed, I shall watch your reactions, and when the time is right, deliver the final blow to this scheme. Madame Montclair's shoulders sagged. Lady Beatrice pressed her pearls. Dr. Firth wiped her glasses. Captain Reeves's jaw clenched. Mr. Mayhew's pen hovered uncertainly. Miss Carstairs trembled. Poirot bowed. "I thank you for your cooperation thus far. Be at the salon at 8 sharp. Until then, reflect upon what you have seen, and what you have done." As he turned and left the room, the group remained huddled in uneasy silence. Outside the window, the London lights began to glitter against the encroaching dusk. Inside, the pieces lay before them, aligned at last, and ready for Poirot to complete the pattern in one final consummate stroke. Chapter 8. Denouement in the drawing room. The final séance began at 8 o'clock sharp. The crimson drapes had been removed and examined, the planchette fitted with a new brass catch, and the antique card replaced with an unmarked token. The room was arranged almost identically to the first séance, yet an undercurrent of apprehension rippled through the circle. Madame Montclair presided at the piano, Dr. Firth prepared her scientific instruments discreetly at a side table, and the others took their positions with strained calm. Poirot, seated to the left of Miss Carstairs, surveyed his companions with gentleness masking steely resolve. He had insisted on conducting this séance himself, promising only a concluding spectacle, before revealing all. Now, under the flicker of 6 candles, the stage was set for the final act. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, voice low and serene, "thank you for joining me on this solemn occasion. Tonight, the spirits themselves have graciously agreed to permit my guiding hand. Let us invoke our silent guests once more, that they might speak their truths." He closed his eyes and lowered his head, creating a moment's hush so deep it seemed to envelop every creaking floorboard and distant footstep beyond the walls. Dr. Firth intoned the opening invocation in her clear, precise tone. Madame Montclair accompanied on the piano with slow, minor chords that seemed to draw the candlelight inward, as though the flames themselves listened. The planchette sat ready at the center of the table, and Poirot's eyes flicked from face to face as the ritual progressed. At the close of the invocation, Poirot raised his head. "Let us welcome the spirit of the late Professor Reginald Keene." He reached forward and placed a finger upon the planchette. The others followed suit, tension visible in their gloved fingertips. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the planchette twitched. Lady Beatrice started, eyes wide. Dr. Firth leaned forward. Mr. Mayhew's breath caught. Madame Montclair stiffened. Captain Reeves blinked rapidly. Only Poirot remained still, his small moustache unmoved by surprise. The planchette moved to the letters SPIIT, then to SPIS, as though reaching for the word spite. A collective murmur rose. Poirot asked, eyes locked on the planchette, "Spite?" Whose spite are we to hear? The planchette ground to a halt, then glided to the letter M. It paused, then to U, then R, spelling M-U-R. A tremor ran through the circle. Poirot leaned forward. M-U-R, 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 he nodded to Dr. Firth. Murder. A sudden crash of wind rattled the windows, though each had been secured. The candles flickered violently, then settled. Poirot raised a hand to calm his colleagues. Ladies and gentlemen, this is no mere spiritual message. It is the confession of a guilty mind, manifested through the planchette manipulated by mortal hands. He turned slowly to Lady Beatrice. Madam, your intention to frighten Professor Keen was born of jealousy, yes? Her shoulders slumped. She gave a small, shuddering nod. Yet you lacked the means to acquire belladonna and the skill to tailor a playing card. Poirot's gaze shifted to Dr. Firth. You possessed both knowledge and laboratory access, but your temperament is scientific, without passion enough to kill. Dr. Firth bristled. Are you suggesting I murdered our host? Poirot inclined his head. Only that you helped, unknowingly perhaps, in providing means. He faced Madame Montclair squarely. Madam, you confessed to poisoning Professor Keen's wine. But you claimed you acted alone, as a moment of desperation. Her lips quivered. Yet you did not forge the card, nor tamper with drapes or planchette. That required a deft hand and mechanical skill. He turned to Captain Reeves. Captain, your military service taught you precision and stealth. You knew how to file pinholes, how to adjust a safety catch, and how to manipulate a sash. You also discovered the loosened window catch and pocketed the playing card, until you realized it was a decoy. Reeves's face went ashen. Monsieur Poirot, But the collaboration between our conspirators depended on trust, Poirot continued. Madame Montclair provided motive and access to the wine, Dr. Firth supplied the poison, and you orchestrated the theatricals to mask their acts. Captain Reeves rose, hands clenched. I did it for honor. Keen, he humiliated me over that medal. When Madame Montclair seconded my plan to frighten him, I extended it. He turned to Madame Montclair and Dr. Firth. You both needed my skills. Without me to stage the séance diversions, your schemes would have been obvious. Dr. Firth gasped. You framed me. Madame Montclair sobbed. You promised you'd only scare him, a bit of theatrical flair. You said you'd restore the window catch after. You promised. Reeves's shoulders slumped, as though the weight of his own guilt had finally crushed him. I didn't mean to kill him. The poison, that was yours, wasn't it, Dr. Firth? Dr. Firth sank into her chair. I did provide the belladonna samples, for analysis. You took them without my knowledge. Poirot nodded. A chain of complicity. Each of you contributed a link, Madame Montclair, the motive and poison, Dr. Firth, the toxin and its delivery vehicle, Captain Reeves, the mechanics of deception, Lady Beatrice, the red herring of silk fibers, Mr. Mayhew, the promise of sensational publication, and Miss Carstairs. He paused, inviting the medium's trembling voice. I only saw shadows, she whispered. I did not touch anything. Precisely, Poirot said. Miss Carstairs was the unwitting catalyst, her genuine terror lending authenticity. Mr. Mayhew's promise of headlines ensured your caution. Together, you thought yourselves beyond reproach. He walked slowly around the table, each step deliberate. Yet the little grey cells, applied with rigorous logic, have uncovered the truth. The poison in the wine, the custom playing card, the drilled drapes, the planchette tampering, they were parts of a concert designed to destroy a man who stood between you and your ambitions. Madame Montclair buried her face in her hands. Lady Beatrice dabbed at her eyes. Dr. Firth sat rigid, and Captain Reeves stared at the floor, shame in his eyes. Mr. Mayhew closed his notebook with trembling fingers. Poirot raised a final hand. Miss Amis, justice shall take its course. The police will be summoned. But let this tragedy stand as testament to the perils of jealousy, ambition, and misplaced trust. He turned to Madame Montclair and offered a small gesture of compassion. Madam, I know your heart was tormented. Yet the method was too cruel. Human life is not to be toyed with. She nodded through tears. I understand. Poirot returned to his seat beside Miss Carstairs, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Be calm, mademoiselle. You spoke the truth in your fear and guided us here. As the candles flickered one last time, a sense of solemn relief descended. The séance was over, the mystery solved, and the conspirators unmasked. Outside, the London fog had lifted, revealing a serene night sky. Inside, Poirot's little grey cells rested, having once again illuminated human darkness with the light of reason.